This is Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing. I'm Rachel Gordon. Here, we aim to make the process of writing and publishing a bit more transparent and a bit less overwhelming. Through conversations with editors and academics at all stages, from full professors to graduate students, independent scholars, and postdocs, we share stories, lessons, and helpful habits from our writing lives. We're really excited to get to speak with Laura Portwood-Stacer, who is a developmental editor and founder of Manuscript Works, a consultancy serving academic authors around the world. She is the author of Lifestyle Politics and Radical Activism, and previously she taught media and cultural studies at NYU and the University of Southern California. Laura is also the author of two books published by Princeton University Press, one called The Book Proposal Book, a guide for scholarly authors, and the other book is called Make Your Manuscript Work, a guide to developmental editing for scholarly writers. So, Laura, it sounds like you had a more traditional academic career before. Maybe you can tell us about how and why you got into this kind of academic adjacent type of work.
Sure. Yeah, I did have a traditional trajectory. I got a Ph.D. in communication, and I wrote a book based on my dissertation, which you mentioned kindly. And in my first academic job as a visiting assistant professor, I was asked to step into the role of associate editor of a journal in my field, where I was co-editing with another academic essays and book reviews. And the turnaround for our section of the journal was very short. It was not peer reviewed. So we would solicit abstracts and people would have a few weeks to give us an essay and we'd have a few weeks to turn it around and get it ready for the next issue. So it turned out to be a very hands-on editorial job because to make sure those things were up to our standards of publication, we needed to give a lot of guidance to our writers and really help them hone in on their arguments and get to the point of what they were trying to say in these short pieces. And although that was, just kind of a side volunteer aspect of my academic job, it ended up being one of the most fulfilling parts of it for me. I was hearing from the authors I was working with there that they had never gotten that level of feedback on their academic writing. And they had never had someone take such care with the thing they were trying to publish and make them look good when they were getting their work out into the world. And so as that job was a short-term contract wrapped up, I thought, well, maybe I could go full-time with the editing work. And so that is what I ended up doing. I started my own business and worked on much longer form manuscripts with authors on journal articles and book manuscripts and book proposals. And that's what I've been doing for the past 11 years now. It just showed to me what a need for it there was, because people were just hungry for that kind of care and attention. And so I saw the need and thought I could step into it. Yeah.
Great. Thinking of your book, The Book Proposal Book, your book asks scholars to think first about readers. And I don't know if this was always the way you wrote. I feel like a lot of us academics don't always do this. We're thinking about the subject and the scholars we need to cite. How did you personally make that move to thinking about readers?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about readers when I wrote my first book, which was a revision of my dissertation, but I did the very common thing that I think academics do, where I imagined the most hostile reader possible and the people who were going to shoot all the holes in what I had to say or who were going to find fault with my research methods. So I had been sort of reader-oriented, but as I came to help other writers and really getting into guiding them through the publication process, I started to see how important it is to make the case to a publisher that there are people out there who want to read what I have to say. And that's sort of the point of like a book proposal and going through the publishing process is making that case.
Is that something, I'm wondering if that's something you also felt like academics were not naturally seeing about the book proposal, that it was actually making the case for this potential readership?
Yes, absolutely. I think people in academia, we are so used to seeing like a proposal or an abstract or something as like a justification of the scholarship itself, of like, well, why is this question interesting, or why does it need to be studied? And that is part of what a publisher is looking at when they're considering a book project, but they're really not in the business of assessing the merit of the scholarship. They're in the business of assessing, can we turn this into essentially a product that people will want to buy and spend time with and benefit from intellectually, if they're an academic publisher. And so it really is so totally reader oriented on the publishing side in a way that as writers, as academic writers, we aren't always trained to think in that way.
So for listeners who, haven't written a book proposal, or I don't know, maybe we always feel like we're learning how to do it with each one, what is the core proposal package? And I'm guessing in your mind this has something to do with showing that this manuscript we're writing can be a good product out there for readers.
Yeah, so the proposal is a pretty formulaic document. Different publishers are going to ask for different elements, but they're all essentially asking for the same thing. And it's a working title for the book, the thing that the readers are going to see first when they pick up this object. It's the project description or overview and the table of contents and chapter summaries, which is partly just a synopsis of your research and what you found, but it's more so, what is a reader going to find on the pages of this book? Like, what is the experience of reading this book going to be like for them? So it really gives a clue into the materials that are being drawn on and how they're presented to the reader and the organization of the book. And then there are a bunch of other aspects of the proposal that are maybe more meta and are really about, like, how is this going to land with readers? And so you're going to talk about your intended audiences. You're going to talk about the other books on the market that are serving those same audiences that are going to sort of prime them to be ready for your book. You're going to talk about the specifications in terms of the length, the number of images, like what is this actual package going to look like when it's a book someone could hold in their hands. And then publishers want to know some other information, like how much of it is complete at this point, when will it be complete and ready for peer review, who are you as the author and what experience are you bringing to this? And what they're really interested in there is what's going to be appealing to our readership about you as an author, as an expert on this subject or someone with some relevant experience. And then often publishers will ask for a writing sample, which is usually in an academic book, an actual chapter from the manuscript, so that they can get a sense of what the writing is going to look like on the page. So that would be the core package you'd be submitting to a publisher.
The author bio, or how the author is going to sort of help sell this product. For a trade press book, I can sort of imagine that being part of selling it. I'm not used to the idea that for an academic press, they care all that much, or we're thinking about marketing you, the author, along with the book.
Yeah, so I think it varies. It depends on the book and how they're going to market it. But I do think they are interested in, even if they're not going to like splash the author's photo and some,
Yeah.
hooky story about the author, they do want to see that this is an author who is visible in their field, visible to the readers they are trying to reach, that they have a track record of not just expertise of having published and done research and maybe having a teaching position, having a Ph.D., all of those credentials, but making themselves visible, putting their work out there, being somebody who is willing to be a partner in promoting this book when it comes out. And that doesn't mean you have to have hundreds of thousands of social media followers or, a newsletter with 10,000 subscribers, but just having shown that you're willing and thinking about readers and how to bring them to your conversation is appealing to all publishers.
Yeah, I was just editing one of our podcast episodes that we're about to drop with a Yale University Press editor who I guess is used to publishing or editing the academic, but also some of the crossover books at Yale, and was surprised that she, like what you're saying, is like, I am absolutely interested in, unfortunately, this term that academics hate, the platform, and I will absolutely Google academics to see, are they out there giving talks? Are they sort of working to help bring the book out and in the world? And I guess she allowed for the possibility not everyone has to be that way, but it can be a helpful, attractive thing in a potential academic author, even, as you're saying.
Yeah, and I work with a lot of people who are scared of that word platform. because they think it means I have to be all over social media or I have to be this sort of outgoing celebrity type. That's just not me. But I always try to reassure people that what platform looks like it can vary and that academic publishers have different expectations. And it may be that you're really active in your subfield and you're convening colloquia, the kind of things that a lot of academics like to do and like to talk about their research in a way that doesn't feel self-promotional. That's all still author platform. So I think it's for authors, it's more of a mindset thing about coming to understand that it's really about the avenues you've set up to get your work in front of other people in whatever that looks like.
You also mentioned the section of comparable books. I know many of us academics are confused about, do I want to mention books that are like mine and are doing really well? And will that make an editor think, well, we don't need another one? Or like mine, but show, that they're clearly not doing everything, or I point to sort of what's missing or how they're not as successful as I think mine will be. What do you see that list as doing?
Yeah, well, I see the comparable books list as being, no one book on that list has to be doing everything. So it's really a triangulation, I think, of different books. And so I think it's absolutely a good idea to show that there are other books like the one you're trying to write that have been successful. Now, if they're published by a different press than the one you're trying to publish with, that's great because your press doesn't have a book yet like that. So they may be happy to now get one that they can compete with that other press with. And it's also fine to point out that there are books that maybe haven't reached the level of success that you want, although you want to make the case that your book is going to offer something that's going to sort of offset that risk, and that you are doing something that will be appealing to readers. So again, it's really about being reader focused and showing what your book offers, whether it offers something similar or something complementary or something different, but that other book helps the editor understand what you're trying to do with your book. They paint a collective picture, really.
I've heard of some authors I think it's been in that sort of comparable book section, since you said sort of painting a full picture, they've talked about, say, an article in the New Yorker or a film, things on this subject that might have seemed niche, but show there is a kind of more general interest, even in that beyond the academy world. Maybe that's more useful for trade press, but do you see something like that as potentially being helpful?
I think it can be helpful. I mean, if I was working with somebody on their proposal and they floated that idea, I would say include that in your audience discussion where you're establishing that there is a readership and here's the kinds of things they're interested in, and here's the conversations I'm stepping into. I think when you mention things in the comparable books section, if that's what the publisher has asked for, that are not books, you're actually not really helping the editor do their job because they are trying to produce a book and see that there's a market for a book. There may well be a market for a movie or an article and not a market for a book on a certain topic. So I think it's just about understanding what is the purpose of each section of the proposal, what is the case you're really trying to make to the publisher. And it's fine to include all that information, but just kind of think about how you're framing it.
Yeah, and in that audience section, I know I sometimes struggle with, well, am I writing sort of hype here, like this is who I hope the audience will be? How do people rate this in a way that's convincing and doesn't just sound like, yeah, I wish lots of groups would read my book?
Right. Well, that's a great question, and that's one of the reasons. So I teach a course on writing book proposals, and we go component by component, and I sort of guide people to produce these little sections of writing that are ways of writing they're unfamiliar with or might be uncomfortable with in the way you're talking about. And so when we do the audience section, I have people, instead of coming up with wishful audiences, as I might call them, I have them look at their track record. Who are the people they have already managed to reach? Who are the people they have already spoken to in their work? And it doesn't need to be, a huge bestseller level of audience. It's just who have you shown that you have been in conversation with, that you have a few data points you can marshal here. And often authors, once they sit down and start writing it all out or looking through their CV, there's more there than they thought. And they can really point to, well, this is an audience I've been in conversation with. And it's a real group of people who subscribe to this journal or who go to this conference or who teach in these departments. I think that's really helpful for staying concrete and grounded.
So could that look like, for instance, if I'd been I've given talks on this subject at American religion conferences. I've been invited to present on it in undergraduate classes in American religion. JCCs have invited me to give talks to their community groups. Those might be the types of audiences I could then describe.
100%. That sounds perfect. And therefore you could show, like, I've got an audience among my fellow expert academics. I have got an audience among undergraduate students. I've got an audience among a community that maybe is outside of academia, but is interested in my work. That's all great. A+ on your proposal.
Can you talk about stating the thesis in the proposal? Why this is important and how we should think about doing it for our book?
Yeah, so this is a thing people surprisingly often miss. They're really focused on the topic of their book and maybe proving that it's an interesting topic, and that is fine. But what a publisher is looking for is not just a topic, because anybody could write a book about that topic, hypothetically. They're looking for what you are bringing to that topic. What is your unique take as a scholar, with somebody who has put in the time and the thought into this subject matter? And that's where the thesis is what sets you apart, and makes your project thoroughly your own. And so that is why I think it's so important to get across, as early as possible in that proposal, what is the argument you are trying to make? What is the point you want every reader to come away from this book understanding? And that is what really sells the project to a publisher.
Laura, I didn't ask you at the start, but you do work with authors who are both doing sort of straight up academic press, and are you also working with authors who are looking to submit to trade presses, maybe through an agent?
Yeah, I do get some
Hmm.
of those authors. Most are sort of traditional academic writers, but definitely I work with people who want to write something that reaches a broader audience, want to cross over, and know that they have just not been given the training on how to do that in academia.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess especially it seems like nowadays many of the academic presses are doing more of these crossover type books. And so this point you make about the argument sort of showing what I as the author am bringing in terms of my perspective, my argument, does that suggest that the proposal has a bit of me or my approach or my perspective or my story?
Yeah, yeah. I
Mhm.
mean, I think the author really needs to show up in the proposal. I think that's very important to a publisher.
How might that look, or for like a humanities book proposal?
I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be telling a personal story or or having it be like a memoir, but I do think really figuring out what is it that you have to say that only you could say, because you're the only one who has done this particular research, and making sure that is clear and emphasized throughout is important.
And does that mean you often end up encouraging writers to use like the I pronoun actually in writing?
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't see that as a problem at all in a book proposal.
Hmm. I also wanted to ask you about the dissertation to first book. What have you noticed are some of the main issues for first book authors in terms of turning the dissertation into a book or writing the book proposal that shows this is not just my dissertation?
Yeah, I think the thing that I see, I mean, there's all the sort of typical things everyone's familiar with, like you have too much lit review, you talk about methodology too much citation of other scholarship. And that's all like, yeah, that ends up coming out in the wash as you do your revision. But I think the main principle that all that sort of falls under is that your dissertation was sort of for you to like write up the study you did. So it's really about the study. And the book is not about the study. The book is about what we learn from studying what you studied, and the sort of the conclusions and the advance to a broader knowledge. So what I often find with people who are writing proposals for something that started as a dissertation is they're still sort of in that inward looking mode where they're looking at the dissertation and trying to like summarize it for the publisher. But what they should be doing is thinking about, what do I want the reader to know what do I want other people to know about what I found? It's just like a different perspective to take on the material.
Is it different because I'm then thinking about what are sort of the highlights or the really trying to bring out what is most interesting or relevant for readers?
Yes, yes. And this concept of portability comes in here that I hear publishers talk about as being something that they're looking for. The conclusion from your like insular dissertation study can't just be about the specific object you studied or the specific group. It has to be something that could apply to many, many other scholars and what they are studying and what they are looking at. Because hardly anybody in the world is going to be as interested in your specific subject matter as you are, or they'd all be writing books about it, right? So it's really about figuring out what is the broader lesson that I can teach to others based on what I found in my specific research.
So is portability kind of like relevance then?
Sure. Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess you could put it that way.
About the actual craft of writing this proposal, I know that many historians and other humanities scholars are used to the idea of kind of an anecdote or something very narrative at the start. The idea is this is going to sort of pull the reader in and show the editor that I can write, that I can tell a story here. Is that something you recommend?
Yeah, I do recommend some kind of a hook at the beginning of a project description. However, the proposal also should be a succinct document. If you think about publishers, especially some of the most competitive publishers, they might be receiving hundreds, thousands more proposals in a year. And so that editor needs to pretty quickly get to the point of the project and understand, like, how is this going to be a book? And so, yes, they do want to see how you write. That is what your sample chapter or your writing samples are really useful for. When I'm helping people with their project descriptions, I do think some kind of hook to grab the attention and then to really quickly get to the point. And so it can't just be like a fun story or something sort of poetic. Like, it has to be something that leads somewhere to an idea that is at the core of the book. So that's how I would approach that. If you want to use an anecdote or a narrative, it needs to be something that illustrates a bigger idea than just what's in that little story.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned title as one of the ingredients in this proposal. So many of us are used to having editors change the title that it's made me wonder, I guess the title does have to be of interest or should hopefully interest the editor, but the fact that it's not necessarily going to be, and most likely in my experience is not going to be the title at the end, makes me wonder what it's doing in my proposal.
Yeah, great question. So the title really tells the editor what you think the book is about and who you think the book is for. The content of it is important just for like giving them something to connect with, but also just even the fact of you having a well-crafted title sends a signal to a publisher that you have thought about this as a book out in the world that has to appeal to readers when they see that title. So, avoiding the really obscure reference that only makes sense once someone has read the entire manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
That's a common one for writers because they're so immersed in it and they're like, oh, this just so perfectly encapsulates what I'm trying to say, but it actually doesn't make sense to somebody who has never read their research. So just showing that you're thinking about this as a book, as essentially, again, a product that can be marketed, showing that you've taken on that mindset goes a long way with publishers to showing that you're an author they can work with.
And I don't know if this is something you've discussed with clients, but what have you heard or found has been helpful in terms of conversations that academics might have at, say, in a book exhibit hall in a conference, if you're meeting an editor and trying to tell them and maybe even trying to sell them on your project? What have you found what has worked or been helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I do a whole webinar about this, about how to connect with editors, and a lot of that is to do with conference conversations. So there's a lot I could say. But I would say, one of the important things to remember is that it's not a sales pitch if you're talking to somebody at a conference. It's not a monologue. It's not a job interview. It's not a test. At that stage, the most important thing is to make a human connection with this person who you might want to be collaborating with over several years on a project. So you want to tell them who you are and what you work on in a way that makes them understand you're the kind of author they might want to work with. But that doesn't mean you need to be like giving your whole CV. It's more, I'm working on a project related to X, which I know is something your press publishes on. And, this is the angle I'm taking on it. And then try to keep it a conversation as opposed to you just pitching. And use that opportunity if you do get to talk to an editor to get information from them, get guidance from them. What are they looking for? What does appeal to them? I think that is the best way to approach it that will get the best results.
Yeah. I wonder if you could tell us about your own process in terms of these two books that were published by Princeton. How did you find that they were the right press, or let them know these are the kind of books and why I think they might be a good fit at Princeton?
Yeah, well, so the book proposal book, I could do a long, long drawn out story about how that concept sort of came to be, but I did consider several presses for it. I submitted proposal to several presses. The way that Princeton got in the mix was that I was teaching a course about book proposals. And I had a participant in the course who I think was a postdoc at Princeton at the time. And so I was just talking about my project. I was trying to practice what I preach, talk about what you're working on. So you never know who's going to hear about it and have an opportunity for you, right? So I'm talking about how I'm turning this course into a book. And that participant in the course happened to be at like a little, symposium or something that the editor at Princeton, Peter Doherty, was at. And he had mentioned he was looking for books on, scholarly skills. And so this person just happened to know I was working on this book and made an introduction, an email introduction. And then, from there were many steps, but Princeton was the right partner for the project. But I love that story because I think it just proves like, even if a press isn't on your radar at the beginning, you may not know what new initiatives they're working on that your book might be a great fit for, but getting the word out, not being afraid to talk about what you have in progress can really lead to great things.
And since these books have been out with Princeton, what kind of feedback have you received, or, in what ways have you found out that your ideas and thinking have helped other academics?
I mean, the feedback has been phenomenal. I don't think I could have imagined after I published my dissertation book, that has been read by hundreds of people,
Right.
probably, that I could publish a book that would have such impact. I mean, the book proposal book has sold, I don't know how many now, but, over 12,000 copies as of my last royalty statement. I get, emails and messages from people constantly saying, they were able to publish their book because of this guide.
Wow.
I know that they probably could have done it on their own, right? But hopefully I, helped the process a bit. So it is incredibly gratifying to see these guides help people do the work that they really want to do, but that they haven't been given the tools to do successfully. And so, and I credit Princeton with having the series and having the series be really visible and making sure it gets into the hands of people who need it. So that it's been a great collaboration.
About that issue of books being visible, I'm curious what you do or what you've learned as the author of these books about how to publicize your own academic press book better. I mean, Princeton, I've heard, is wonderful with publicity. So maybe they are in fact doing a lot of it. But what else do you do to let people know?
Well, one thing that's unique about me, I mean, maybe not unique, but maybe different from what some of my clients are doing, is that I'm a business owner. So I am constantly in marketing mode and promoting my services. And so the book is just a piece of that. And so, Princeton and I have been able to collaborate. It really is, I think, an equal collaboration with sort of reinforcing each other's efforts. One of the things that has been huge for me is in 2019, I started an email newsletter, like in the couple of years leading up to the release of the book proposal book, where I was kind of chronicling the process of writing that book and sharing some of the content from it as I was assembling it.
Yeah.
And so that newsletter has grown, over the last 6 years. And I am just out there every week talking about the subject that I'm passionate about, which is book publishing for scholarly authors. I'm not always talking about my new book or, my offering or whatever, but I mean, I am talking about that a lot. But it's also about just connecting with my audience that I genuinely want to connect with. And then the book reaching them is kind of a byproduct of that.
Yeah. I mean, since this is a topic area that you're very interested in, I'm curious what what you've noticed has changed a lot in book publishing for academics recently.
I mean, I guess it depends on how recent we want to get. I think this is not a new development. This has been going on for decades. But I think, there's a constricting of sources of revenue for scholarly publishers, in large part due to, constricting of resources at universities and educational institutions where they are not, like academic libraries, for example, are not just buying every book that university presses publish, whereas maybe they used to just kind of have standing orders for those books. And so all publishers are having to get a lot more like nimble and creative about like retailing the books and making them appealing to readers and to individual readers who are going to be deciding whether they want to spend time with a particular book. And so for me and for my authors, that what that translates to is you have to show that this book has value to readers. Again, the readers just become so important. It's not just about like what is the long-term scholarly merit of what you're doing. There kind of has to be a more immediate reader appeal to what you're doing as well. And what I hope I help authors with is that doesn't mean you need to change what you care about or change what you study or change what you write about to be more commercial or more marketable. It's more about doing that work of figuring out what is the value this brings to a community, to a scholarly community or any other kind of community, and proving to publishers that your book is doing that so that they can see it's a good investment for them.
So I'm thinking of, academics I know who are writing about a particular person, something like a biography, maybe a biography in the context of a larger story. How do they show that value for a wider community? Is that about kind of making that bigger context relevant to more people?
Yeah. I think it comes back to the relevance thing. Why should you care? Why should a couple dozen people care about this person? But why should a lot of people care? Why do people who have never heard this person's name in their life, what will they get out of reading their story? That's going to be important to show to a publisher, because then that's how the publisher will in turn market the book to readers.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I'm kind of used to the idea that academic presses don't necessarily need to make money from every book, but maybe you're reminding me that they would still like to. It would be nice if more books had. I mean, I guess I imagine that it's good for them if more of their books have some kind of crossover appeal.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a crossover outside of academia, but a large enough audience that there's a justification for investing all the resources they're going to invest in it. And no, I mean, not-for-profit publishers and even the for-profit publishers that are academic, they're not expecting to turn a profit on any or most of their publications, but they do have to stick to a budget. And so they can't be losing a lot of money on every book they publish. And so you're going to make that decision easier for them as a prospective author by showing you're going to recoup some of your expenses on this one because I'm showing you an audience that is ready and waiting for this book.
Yeah. Speaking of crossover, I'm thinking of chapter length and sort of number of chapters. Many of our guests have talked about they have felt the push or the pull of writing shorter chapters, that this feels less annoyingly academic, that readers enjoy this more, and that the book maybe feels more palatable to a wider audience. Is this a thing that you've noticed at all recently?
I can't say that I have. I think it depends. If you are really pitching the book as a trade book that is to be read by non-academics, then sure. I mean, that kind of question might come into play. Again, most of the people I work with are writing traditional academic, scholarly monographs. So it's less about, it has to be a catchy story. It has to be something you could read in one sitting. For me, when I'm working with authors, it's more about each chapter having a clear point to make and having that the points that the chapters are making be supported by the structure of the book so that the reader's experience of the book is that they are actually absorbing the points that you're trying to get across. And if you're trying to cram maybe 3 aspects of your argument into a 20,000 word chapter, that's nobody has time for that.
Yeah.
Right. Even an academic who's very invested in reading your book with care. So it's less about, you got to have short chapters because it's catchier or snappier. It's more about, think about how the structure of your book can support a really clearly constructed argument. And the byproduct of that is often that you end up with more compact chapters that are each making a focused point.
There's 2 questions we ask all guests, and one is, what is something that you wish you could tell your younger self about publishing or writing that you've since learned?
Maybe I would go back to that myself, who was writing my dissertation book, and just the fear that I wrote that book with. I think I would maybe try to tell myself, it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to write for that audience. Write for an audience who already values what it is you do, and make it about bringing more value to that audience, instead of sort of worrying that your work will be received negatively.
I'm thinking about that because what do you think that the latter would have encouraged you to do more? Would you have sort of taken more chances with the implications or talked more about a wider relevance if you were thinking about adding the value?
Oh, I don't know. I think I just would have enjoyed the experience more.
Yeah.
Of that whole process. And I think also, maybe this goes along with that. It's understanding, yes, you want to be thinking about readers. You want to be offering value to readers and doing something they can connect with, but also your work doesn't have to be for every reader. So don't be afraid to be who you are and to bring the ideas you feel passionate about. And the people who get it will get it, and the people who don't will don't. And that's okay. It's not the end of the world. You'll find your audience.
And does that mean in this, other part of your career with these more recent 2 books, do you feel like you've been more yourself in your writing?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And there are books, and I've maybe it's partly also being a business owner and just kind of coming to understand, I'm not for everybody. I only want to work with the people who want to work with me. I want to write this book for the people who appreciate the way I'm laying out how to write a book proposal or how to revise a book manuscript. And that's going to connect with some people, and it's really going to help them. And some people, it's not going to be for them, and that's fine because there's lots of other books out there on these kinds of topics. So that's kind of nice to know.
Right. No, it's a great attitude to have. Another question we ask is if there's a writing habit or practice that's working for you.
Well, I'm not working on a big project right now, because I'm in sort of the aftermath of a book release, since my most recent one came out last August. But I think what I always try to do, what if I'm writing my newsletter, say, which I do a lot, and these 2 books for publishing, is I just try to come back to, how would I just explain this to a person that I was sitting across from? And that I think is the key to having your voice and your approach and yourself show up. Is it doesn't have to be how you talk. We don't always write the way we talk, but just take the pressure off of it, kind of. Because for me, I'm a teacher. At heart, I like to teach. I love to just impart skills and knowledge to people. And so if I look at writing as teaching, it really feels better to me. And maybe it will for some of your listeners as well.
Yeah, I think I often do the write someone an email trick, writing a friend about what I'm working on. And I guess there too, I'm using your tip of thinking about the reader in the sense of I'm trying to get my friend interested in the thing or show them why I think this is cool. And so that is just kind of coming out in in the way I'm writing, and I find that I'm clearer when I'm, thinking about my friend and communicating to her.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Laura. This has been really helpful and fun.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing, sponsored by the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. Visit our podcast description to find out how to contact us and send us your questions about academic writing and publishing. Follow us on social media at Writing It Pod and subscribe to us so you never miss an episode.